Sometimes a small word can make a big impact. Think about the word yes. Now, think about how that word yes has gotten you to where you are today. I'm on stage at Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama. I teach now at Air University. I look around the room and I go, how did I get here? I've never worn the uniform. None of my family served in the military, yet here I am, having moved from Santa Barbara, California to Montgomery, Alabama. You see, in 2011, my wife's grandma moved out of her home into a care facility. Not that she had much of a chance. Jody's mom could not care for her anymore. Grandma's needs were too big, and Jody's mom's abilities were too small. After the move came the cleanup, and I will remember this day for the rest of my life. Jody came home from Los Angeles. We were living in Ojai, California, just west of Ventura County, and she had a cigar box, and she gave it to me across the table. She said, check that out. And I opened it up, and there was a stack of photographs, airplanes, air crews, airfields, bombs being loaded on airplanes, bombs dropping out of airplanes, bombs dropping out of airplanes onto airplanes. This was World War II. Now, some of the photos had printing, air crews' names, the tail numbers of the airplanes themselves. And I remember Jody asked, what do you think these photos are? I looked at her with a smile on my face and I said, classified! But in all seriousness, these were straight out of a Time Life book. Well, Jody smiled back at me and she says, well, you'll never believe what I did. I scanned them and I published them to Flickr. The next Monday morning, we were sitting at a coffee shop and her phone rang. It was an unidentified number. And I heard this side of the phone. Jody said, hello. She said, yes. She said, yes, I posted those. I remember saying, I told you. After a short conversation, she hung up the phone. She looked at me and she said, that was Mike Farley. I just got a call from him. He's the curator of the 100th Bomb Group Museum in Palm Springs, California. He asked Jody if she had any more photos. You see, on that phone call, he had shared that he had seen pictures of crew members that didn't exist, pictures of tails on airplanes they didn't have. They were beginning to put together some of the puzzle pieces that had been missing since 1944. Apparently, he asked if Jody would donate those photos to the museum. And of course he asked, do you have anything else? Now here's the story. Jody's grandpa, he died when Jody was just 5 years old. Now Jody remembers him as the gruff old man who took her fishing in the backyard, a string attached to a pole with a worm tied to the other end. Grandpa, he was a photographer during World War II. Attached to the 100th Bomb Group at Thorpe Abbotts Field. Jody didn't know this, because friends, what did that greatest generation who came home from fighting tyranny not talk about with their children, their grandchildren, and sometimes even their closest friends? Grandpa Ernie had a life, an entire backstory, one that was growing more and more distance with each passing year. So Jody and her mom drove down to Palm Springs. And there in the museum, they passed on the photographs and other memorabilia of the mighty 8th Air Force of the 100th Bomb Group. She returned from that trip and she again sat down and over coffee one more time, she said, hey, Mom and I are going to go to Cleveland. That's where the big museum is. And they're actually doing a reunion of the members and their families of the 100th. Would you like to go? Yes, of course, I said. We spent 3 days listening to the stories of these airmen and their families, generations who had lived before, during, and after that Second World War. They told us about their events at the 100th and their events since that day. And then the third day of the conference. I'll always remember this one as well. Up on stage, dressed in his mess dress, giving a speech on leadership and legacy and love and consideration and community was Colonel Bill DeMarco, the 100th Operations Group Commander at RAF Mildenhall. You see, after they closed down the bomb group, they moved the mission from Thorpe Abbotts to Mildenhall, and it became an air refueling wing. He called out the heroism and the contribution of those who had served during that time. After his speech, I approached Colonel DeMarco, introduced myself. I let him know that I wrote books and I spoke often and I coached leaders on their leader development skills, the human capital that I so dearly loved. It didn't make sense. I'd never worn the uniform, and my family didn't serve. He said yes to my introduction. And as we shared, I don't even think we were 2 paragraphs in, he said, "Would you travel to Mildenhall and speak to my troops?" So far, saying yes had been working. Yes to posting the pictures to the internet. Yes to visiting the Palm Springs Airport Museum. Yes to traveling to Cleveland. So I said yes. That next spring of 2012, my 3rd book was published, and in my hand, I flew from Los Angeles to London. The next thing I knew, I was on stage in front of hundreds of airmen for the very first time. Those who had just months of experience wearing the uniform, others who had already given a lifetime of service, and me, the civilian. Today, the visit to RAF Mildenhall is but a blur. I mean, I can see specific events in my mind. I attended a promotion. I got to fly in the simulator. I visited the control tower. We even walked off base to the pub that the Legacy Airmen had been visiting for more than 50 years. Yes, 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 and yes. From 2012 and on, for the next 6 years, Bill, I get to call him Bill now, he would call from time to time. Would you visit this base? Would you talk to these folks? Travis, Mildenhall. I got to visit with Maxwell and Vandenberg. Then, in 2017, I opened up my email one morning. I happened to be at the very hotel we stayed at when we flew to Cleveland to attend that reunion. And the email said, "We're looking for people who would move to Montgomery to teach in our new school. Might you know anyone?" Might I know anyone? Let me go look in the mirror. Yes, I said. Now, let me be honest. My dream growing up was not to move to the deep south. I mean, I was born in Northern California. I had spent most of my time on the Central Coast. I lived in Mexico and Argentina at different points, but here I was, contemplating an application with the intent to move from the hills of Santa Barbara to Montgomery, Alabama. Jody and I talked about it. I dreamed about it. I meditated on it. I journaled about it. And it always came back to a simple question. Did Grandpa Ernie leave those photos so that this would happen? My answer is an obvious yes. Now, there's a longer story about how me, at the time, a non-PhD, got a job teaching at a military university. But right now, what I'm sitting with is what happens when I say yes. Yes to an opportunity, yes to taking a chance, and yes to going all in on what I've been offered.